you ready for the incredible sound of classic rock? No? Good, because now it's time for Visiting the Village.
Welcome to Visiting the Village Croaky Voice Edition. I'm Paul Kilduff-Taylor, and with me is the infinitely talented Ian Hardingham.
Hello, Mr. Paul Kilduff-Taylor. I'm thinking of streaming one of my old hentai games on Twitch because I want to have a game banned on Twitch.
Let's get out of this dungeon.
It's The Top Story.
Polygon have published an excerpt of Phil Owen's new book, WTF is Wrong with Video Games. In it, he suggests that some of the more video gamey systems, such as the crafting in The Last of Us, are holding back games from being appreciated as art by purely being a distraction and not adding anything thematically appropriate. Ian Hardingham, do we need more coherence in video games?
I'm not sure coherence is really the problem. I'm not the biggest fan of thoroughly linear festivals of QuickTime events like The Last of Us, and I'm sorry if that's a bit overly negative about The Last of Us. I have played it quite a lot. I thought it was okay, but generally these kind of games that are really just vessels for the story feel they're just not really my kind of thing. I really like going to see big budget movies, and I never really feel immersed in these things. If for me to feel immersed in a game, it has to be a lot more emergent than these games tend to be. I find it really hard to tackle this issue. It's something I've been thinking about a lot recently with the games being art debate, because I just don't really see that it's plausible to have generally mechanics work in tandem with narrative.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, so you're kind of both rejecting the whole argument and then saying that the argument, if you do accept it, is impossible. So that's kind of an interesting dual stance. I mean,
sounds like me.
I guess I agree with you in that I think these very linear narrative-focused games draw a lot of the kind of games as art attention, and that's probably not fair, because I think there are a lot more interesting things going on in sort of spaces where gameplay is considered to be more significant. I think that coherence is important for me. I mean, he uses this example of the shiv in The Last of Us and it being ridiculous that you have to go and collect scissors, and collecting scissors has nothing to do with anything else that the game is saying. And I definitely take that point. I think that if you're trying to look for complete coherence, though, I guess I agree with you. In some cases, it's just not going to be possible.
Yeah, I think it tends to work better in much shorter games, where there's much less of a necessity to have a lot of mechanics that kind of are make work, grindy, sort of slightly addictive, but just keep you doing things for a long period of time. If you have a walking simulator or something else that's going to last like an hour or two, you can make it much more effectively just a slightly interactive movie. I agree that crafting is an almost impossible thing to make coherent with such a detailed story as The Last of Us. Crafting is kind of an inherently ridiculous thing when a world is as well crafted as this, and you're not talking about basic building blocks like in Terraria or Starbound or Minecraft. When you have such a detailed world, none of the crafting is really going to make any sense. So it is arbitrary, and it's going to feel really arbitrary. So I think they possibly could have done better. One of the problems about the shiv is that it requires 4 sets of scissors, and that they break straight away. And the author sort of really refutes that as being appropriate for having to create a shiv to kill a zombie. I kind of think that you have to suspend disbelief in any game, really. And I guess what I was trying to get at the beginning is that I sort of find the form of things like Naughty Dog's games in general so problematic to start with that my main issue is not how uncoherent some of these small mechanics are.
Right, yeah, I mean, that's fine. And like I say, again, I think there was this kind of... this really plays into a lot of the sort of games are art debate. I mean, he's kind of talking about ludonarrative dissonance, which is that awful phrase that kind of got massively bandied around kind of about sort of 12, 13 years ago, and that kind of has been really done to death, and I don't think we need to go into that now. And also, there is this problem with kind of starting to criticize these things. I mean, interestingly, a critic that a lot of people told me to read after I was talking about games criticism, who I mentioned before, Lana Polanski, she wrote an interesting post about coherence, and in that post she said, "The issue is not so much that these problems clash particularly noticeably in the moment of play in such a way that jars and therefore leaves an impression on the player. It's that under scrutiny, they don't make any sense to what the game and its various elements are trying to accomplish." So these things kind of work in abstract and they can be okay, but if you're trying to look at the game overall as a project that is a thing that's trying to be meaningful, then yeah, it is stupid that you have to go and collect scissors. And the extent to which anyone, developers or players, need to worry about that is kind of the whole question, I think.
Yeah, I think designers, and I certainly include myself in this, still don't really understand fundamentally what's going on with activities in games. We understand a lot of parts of games. Like I understand why people like good music or good sound effects or good voice acting. Other aspects of games I understand, but in terms of a system like crafting, how it's attractive to you before you've started playing the game, which bits of it feel attractive, would it still be attractive if you understood right at the beginning the limits of the system? Those are the kind of things that I just don't think we're there yet with. When it comes to, I guess, narrative in games for me, and this is probably a bit different to you, I'm really just into atmosphere. I'm also quite a fan of like a big overarching plot that makes sense to me, but I really want something like Thief, which has this fantastic atmosphere. I'm not particularly interested in seeing what happens, in inverted commas, because I kind of want to make things happen. So I kind of reject just subjectively and personally playing through someone else's story, and it's difficult to say why I didn't feel that way about Deus Ex. I mean, Deus Ex in some ways is less linear because it's got a lot of branches, and that's one of the things it's most famous for. But it still in some ways feels a bit like a linear experience, but each individual level was quite freeform, which is absolutely not how I feel about the Naughty Dog games.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely prioritise sort of atmosphere and potential in a fictional space, I guess, more than almost anyone else I've ever met. And so it makes sense that you approach games on that basis, and also that you've chosen games to be the creative mode in which you work, because if you like that, then, as you say, games naturally lend themselves to that very much. The story in games, as has been said a lot, can come from level design and art direction and all of those things other than just sort of narrative and writing. I mean, I think that we're still struggling with, as you said, this idea of kind of what the player is doing. If you look at a lot of games journalism, a lot of the stuff that's praised is the feeling that the player is doing something. I mean, I think Just Cause, the way the Just Cause games were reviewed about like, and then I jumped off this plane, and then I did this, and then I did that, and similarly games like Goat Simulator, which are just about the stories that you're able to tell of like, well, I decided to lick this petrol pump and it exploded, and I did that. I was a goat licking a petrol pump. Where else can you do that? That's where a lot of this stuff comes from. So a lot of it is about, I guess the kind of critical term would be phenomenology. It's kind of this experience of something happening to you. That's the key thing.
Yeah, and that is just so different to playing through an existing story. Like, it just feels like it's almost just a completely different medium.
Yeah.
And of course both are completely valid, and I think that really I'd rather be playing a walking simulator which goes all the way, which really embraces that you are just moving through a space and emphasizes small aspects that are added by being interactive than trying to stick a really, really rigid structure on a first-person shooter or something like that. But that's just me, I guess.
Well, that's something that Proteus does really well, which is that it just kind of says, like, here's this thing that you walk around, and there are things that you can do, there are some sort of interactive parts, but you really don't have to do those. I mean, I didn't really discover a lot of that stuff in Proteus when I played it. I just walked around, and I really liked walking around, and it was nice. So there's a lot of things about walking simulators. I mean, it is interesting. I mean, I like them as a form of telling a linear story. I think it's interesting that we have a gaming form that's experimental, but is also like mega linear and narrative driven. So I'm happy for that to exist as well. But yeah, I think, I mean, it's so interesting to see this type of criticism on a major site, again in this context of a lot of work having been done on these areas already by people, and a lot of these discussions happening. And something that I want to look at more in the future is why is that happening? Like, why do we have this constant, people who are doing more elaborate looks at these topics are absolutely desperate for their work to kind of be boosted up to these mainstream places. So that's something that I'm hoping to look into soon and write about, and probably will affect our future discussions. Paste Magazine have written a list of what they believe to be good tie-in games based on bad movies, although arguably 2 of the 6 entries are fan games rather than tie-ins. Thanks, producer Jimmy, for that essential clarification there. Those games are Manos: The Hands of Fate, which I haven't seen as a movie and I really should, GoldenEye, Peter Jackson's King Kong, the official game of the movie, X-Men Origins Wolverine, The Room, and The Chronicles of Riddick: Escape from Butcher Bay. Ian Hardingham, should more weird movie IP be used for games?
Yeah, I suppose so. I'm pretty sure this article is just in here to troll me about GoldenEye, which is not a bad film.
It's not.
It's not a bad film or a bad Bond film, as this article says. GoldenEye, one of my favourite films of all time. Yeah. I've seen 4 of these, and I quite like the Chronicles of Riddick, the films. And yeah, I've played the games and I quite like them. I'm just not really into third-person combat. I tried to get back into it recently, and unfortunately I'm definitely just not into it. And Wolverine's pretty terrible. Peter Jackson's King Kong is a really bizarre film. I sort of keep watching the first third of it, and I'm constantly reminded by just how weird it is. It's not really a traditional blockbuster at all. So now we've talked about the movies, we're talking about the games. I'm afraid, apart from GoldenEye and the Chronicles of Riddick, I haven't played any of these.
Yeah.
In terms of weird movie IPs being used for games, again, if movie IPs just didn't tend to lead to such terrible games, that would be cool. I mean, it would be cool if a studio like Hammer or something, is that who I mean? Just basically let indie devs use their IP for free for a while. That would be really cool.
Yeah, I think the kind of classic horror movies would be awesome. I mean, this is reaching like to an epic degree if you're going to include these fan games, and it really is like. It does strike me that this is so rare. I think licensing is one of those areas that people really sort of don't get. I mean, we talked about that Motorhead expansion for Victor Vran on the show, and that was awesome because that's an indie game going out and getting a weird IP. Maybe now that we have this sort of democratized production of all forms of indie games, we should have democratized licensing so that we can go and make a Lethal Tender point-and-click game.
Yeah, all of these IPs just lying around, you would kind of hope it would be a bit easier to make an album or a game based on a film from the 80s that no one's doing anything with apart from occasionally watching on Netflix. Doesn't seem like that would damage the studios too much.
No.
And it sort of harkens back to us talking about assets last week. Like, if you could use a bunch of the assets from some CGI film from 7 years ago, that could make something pretty interesting. But maybe we're entering the dark future where we can't stop piracy or copyright anything at all, and just everything will be open, and that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, I think existing copyright law, some of the stuff that's bad about it is just how hard it is to use existing work in a fun way that could benefit the original rights holders. I mean, a lot of the time it's impossible. Like, I don't know who owns, the rights to some incredibly obscure film that I saw on Netflix, and I'm sure, if you asked, I doubt the people involved would know either. So that's a really bad situation, and if that's the dark future, then I welcome our new copyright overlords.
Okay.
Keith Stewart spoke to Bungie recently for a retrospective of Destiny's first year. In it, they talk about technical difficulties, game design choices, and the problem of player retention. The question I want to ask you is this new kind of mega monolithic game development the future of AAA?
I think it probably is. This article's very interesting. I find Destiny a very interesting game because a lot of people seem to hate play it. It's a very divisive game, but it's obviously popular enough to still be keeping Bungie afloat and working on it a lot. When I read about the kinds of things they do, it really makes me think about the conversation we had about free-to-play last week. It's very analytics-based. They spend a lot of time looking at individual people's experience, seeing where they get stuck, where they quit, trying to constantly be iterating the experience you have when you're playing, and it just all feels really kind of sort of cynical and a bit weird. And I was sort of having that feeling while reading this article, reading about their crack teams that jump on bugs and problems players are having and have these flash meetings to try and work out what to do about it. I was having this feeling of disgust at it, but then also realizing that when you have franchises, and Destiny might not be quite there yet, but franchises that are as big as Halo and Call of Duty, this is just what makes sense, and this is kind of basically where Hollywood is now to a certain extent, when the very biggest properties will have a huge amount of oversight at any level. So yeah, I do think this is the future of what I might term quadruple A.
Oh, no, let's not. This company's already had enough history of redefining the A's. I think this is kind of interesting because although you say that there's some sort of negative connotations that all this stuff has, it appears they've massively improved the game. I mean, the latest expansion is something that people have universally welcomed, and it seems to be something that's kind of taken the elements of it and improved them. I mean, I started playing Destiny yesterday, and from my 15 minutes of play, I'm sure I can have a lot of incredibly well-informed opinions about the game. I just started kind of through the tutorial.
Well, I'm glad one of us has played it
right,
to have a conversation about it.
So you just start, I mean, this tutorial is just a corridor shooter, and you start going through, and then some monsters jump out, and it's very, like, I was playing it, and my wife was there, and she kind of saw like the bit where you start shooting, and she was just like, oh yeah, it's one of these games, and I just felt the same about it as well, like, oh yeah, it's one of these games. It's one of those games, but kind of with the most accoutrements possible to that style of game. It's just so weird how the very first bit of the game is like Doom, and then behind it is like this gigantic crazy MMO with like these competitive arena bits, and it's kind of completely overwhelming. You're right that people talk about it in this huge variety of different ways, and it's one of those games that's been incredibly poorly defined. Like, I can't tell you what I think the critical consensus is on Destiny at all. It just seems all over the place.
Part of this article talks about criticism aimed at it, saying it's like a slot machine. I liken it to Diablo 3 here, where the company spends such a huge amount of time crafting the random schedule of reward and their end goal is to have something that is as addictive as a slot machine, that gives you really exciting rewards but not too often. And I'm just massively turned off by that, for the same reason I'm massively turned off basically by gambling, which is that I don't want an experience that's designed to kind of be linear in that sort of way. It feels very linear to me. I want to have like terrible lows and great highs, and if a great high makes me love the game in a weird way and a terrible low makes me just quit playing the game, that's kind of something I want to be in play. I don't want to be in this padded room of this unbelievably designed experience again. Yeah, it's funny we're talking about this again in a game that's very random and very like Diablo, but I feel in a lot of ways the same kind of problems with it. It feels linear now because of how well crafted it is. There's things that are so exciting about stuff like Dwarf Fortress, to a certain extent Prison Architect, is that they're broken and they're weird and that lots of different things can happen, and every so often something very, very, very cool will happen. And that again is actually my problem with MMOs and any multiplayer game which is not completely skill based. Because in order to balance games so that they're fun for almost everyone, you kind of just have to make them, again, linear in this way. So I really only want to play multiplayer games, something like Rocket League, something like Tribes, which is skill-based, and if I'm just worse than everyone, that's got to be okay.
I was going to bring up Rocket League here, because I've realised now, I mean, Rocket League's the console game that I've probably played most, like, in the recent era. And the reason that I play Rocket League is because it has such a high, like, such a low skill baseline. Like, it doesn't matter if I'm playing badly. I can still play it. It's like a space that I can be in that's relaxing. I can do stuff. And that's so rare. And I kind of wonder if Destiny is a bit like that. Like, you can kind of just wander around and shoot some stuff and, like, get some loot and things, and it's kind of quite relaxing, because that's what I'm really looking for now. These more hardcore games are just not something that I'm able to invest time in, and I guess I'm looking for this kind of bringing in the casual experience, but to something that's very expansive. Casual games have traditionally been extremely narrow and limited, but a game where you can kind of wander around and sort of do stuff for half an hour is something that's really attractive to me, and I guess that's what I want Destiny to be. I have no idea if it is or not.
Well, I would say that if you want that, you want to look at games like Counter-Strike and Rocket League that don't really have a meaningful larger progression system.
Yeah.
Because that's what's cool. You can jump in and a billion different things can happen. It doesn't really matter. Whereas every time you get into an MMO, something like Destiny and Diablo 3, what they're desperately trying to do is hook you. The whole thing is they want to basically get you on this addiction track and keep you playing, not give you like a unit of really exciting, really satisfying gameplay. Or they're trying to do both. And again, that's just for me, not for me. So that I definitely agree that's the kind of thing that I look for, and I get that out of Spelunky, and I did get that out of Counter-Strike quite a lot back in the old days when I was playing it, certainly Tribes too. And I've always had a massive thing for making a game really self-contained. I don't want to have a larger leveling thing. I don't want to have gear that you unlock over a long period of time in a multiplayer game. That just doesn't work for me. And as we are exposed to how effective that is, we have real difficulties as a development company trying to work out, what parts of that we take and what parts we don't. And every so often there'll be a big breakthrough in terms of stuff like Counter-Strike's skins, where someone works out how to do it in a way that works for everyone.
Yeah, right, exactly. A lot of these things, I mean, unlocks just are kind of baffling to me still, even though I've played games where sort of unlocks can work. But yeah, I mean, just like imagine if you had to play Rocket League and then like after 20 hours you got a faster car, and just like how completely wrong that would be.
And everyone else has a faster car while you've got the slower car. That's what's really offensive. It even lowers the possibility of something really amazing happening.
Exactly, yeah. It makes the game less interesting to play because it kind of homogenizes it. And it's difficult, but it's interesting to see these things get worked out. I mean, I wonder if I'll be able to play Destiny for long enough to figure out like whether the expansion kind of did really do the things they wanted. I mean, I'm still sort of slightly interested in it. The larger scale, like MMO-ish shooter thing is something that does interest me. So we'll see if I stick with it. Recently, US cable channel TBS announced that they're going to start their own CSGO league at some point next year. The intention is to broadcast matches from the league live on the channel. TBS is working in conjunction with talent agency esports organisation WMEIMG. Ian Hardingham, is this going to be another misguided mainstream TV esports venture?
Well, I have the slightly negative opinion that almost anything TV does now, including just continuing to do what it was doing before, is misguided. So I think that this could easily be, not a huge success and not rescue anything, but also be pretty cool. I'm actually pretty optimistic about this. I massively romanticize being on TV. I do not romanticize being in the newspaper or any of the other things that are really in trouble. But being on a proper TV channel, having my game shown on a proper TV channel is something very exciting to me. And if this was on Dave or something at 1 a.m, I would rush to that and watch that straight away.
I mean, I guess that's to do with like the age we are, that we still think that's interesting. The problem that I have with a lot of these ventures is that the esports audience is quite young, and I just don't know if they want to consume this stuff on TV. I think the move away from TV is the reason that esports is becoming popular. So to see it kind of retroactively bumped back into TV is just kind of weird to me. Equally, you're right, like, what else are you going to fill your airtime with now that a lot of people can watch? I guess the audience for CS is probably skews slightly older than, say, the audience for MOBAs. I'm in really sketchy territory here, that's pure speculation. But certainly, you know, CS does have some of the older commentators who are kind of from the esports scene in the mid-90s onwards, so that might imply that. I just don't know what to make of this. Like, exactly like I didn't really know what to make of the ESPN, you know, Blizzard Heroes of the Storm thing. Like, that was just met with widespread bemusement, even though it was very cool. I don't sort of know what my position on this is, really.
Well, I mean, the best case scenario for esports is that somehow being on TV introduces it to a new audience.
Yeah.
The idea being that there are lots of older people who don't want to watch things on Twitch, who might just get into it via this way. I think I agree that they're not going to convert the existing audience particularly. In terms of on TV right now, the most valuable thing is any kind of live programming, because it stops people recording it and then not watching the adverts. So any kind of new sport is very, very attractive right now. So I'm not surprised that they're willing to punt on it, and I doubt it's a particularly expensive punt.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't necessarily. I'm not necessarily with you on the negatives of this. I mean, I don't. You know, TV shows some pretty niche stuff. I don't think that pro gaming is niche enough to be below some of the weird stuff they put on late at night. And I think that, not that this would ever happen, but if ESPN decided to back esports with all of their might, they would convert a portion of the population. I mean, I'm always paying attention to ESPN's English Premier League coverage, which has rocketed recently, and they're basically selling it constantly to Americans. They are not reacting to an increase in popularity. They have bought the rights, and they are trying to create the popularity. So lots of different things there.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, would you say that the interest in soccer in the US was grown because of that, or are they reacting to a generalized increase in interest in soccer?
Well, I mean, I think it's sure. I mean, to be clear, I mean, one of the reasons they bought the rights to start with was because they saw which way the tide was turning, definitely. And the World Cup last year was really big for soccer in the States. But when I look at a fair number of different American sports websites, and the extent to which ESPN covers the EPL is so much wider than any of the other channels. And I know from reading interviews with them that this is partially because they're basically pushing it, and they put things on the front page which they're pushing, and that makes a lot of sense. So that's kind of just a minor point. I would love to see them go after StarCraft 2 or Counter-Strike to make it happen. I mean, yeah, in terms of the audience being young and them just watching it on Twitch, I mean, that's fine. I would like to hope that there was a late night poker size audience of people who are older, who are ex-big gamers, who would be happy to watch it on TV. But of course, TV is just kind of going down and down. So late night poker happened 15 years ago. And if this happened 15 years ago, I think it would have had a much bigger chance of success.
Right, yeah. I mean, that kind of goes to what I'm saying. It does feel to me like this is a bit late to the party for TV. But equally, you know, your point about putting niche things on in weird time slots is not a thing that's going to go away. And this is a kind of ideal candidate for that, I guess.
Yeah, I was... to talk about Twitch for a minute, I was talking to Visiting the Village Magic the Gathering correspondent Tom Richards about Twitch, and Twitch crashes all the time for him. and he was saying that he'd seen that YouTube was starting to do some live casts of some Magic, and that he was going to go straight to YouTube because Twitch was really unstable for him. Is that generally a problem with Twitch, or is it just like because he has a really old computer?
No, that's crazy. I mean, I've never heard that. Twitch is I can leave Twitch running like for 20 hours and it won't crash. A lot of it depends on, like, they had some weird stuff negotiating like Flash in browsers, and if you had some weird problem with Flash it can go wrong. On some hardware it seems to go wrong, I guess, as well. So if he's using really old weird hardware, then that's possible. But generally my experience of Twitch is better than almost any other streaming service. It's on a par with Netflix for me. It probably goes wrong at the same rate. I always compare it favourably to stuff like Channel 4 and the BBC's live streaming, which is lower quality and much more unreliable. So that's where I'd locate it. I'd say better than TV channels, probably just around the level of Netflix.
Okay, fair enough.
This year's COD installment, Black Ops 3, will have significant differences between the PS3 Xbox 360 and the PS4 Xbox One PC versions, the most significant of which is the lack of any sort of single-player campaign. Also missing from the last-gen versions are the weapon paint shop and esports tools. To compensate for the loss, they will be $10 cheaper. This is astonishing. Let's start with this question. Is $10 all a single-player campaign is worth?
It may be all that the Call of Duty Black Ops 3 single player is worth.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought this was really noteworthy. In some ways, it's sort of more noteworthy than surprising. I can see why, you know, a lot of people still have a PS3 or an Xbox 360. A lot of people like Call of Duty, and a lot of people like playing it online. And I'm sure they're happy that they're getting something rather than nothing. But to release a game that's had the whole single player chopped off is just really bizarre.
Yeah, it is. This is really dangerous to me because I totally get the thinking here. Here's the thinking, right? It's important to have coverage, especially 360. We talked about this like a couple of weeks ago. The 360 is still a force, and of course the PS3. So you gotta have a SKU for those. But you want to do all this cool next-gen stuff, and you can't do it. And someone's gone, look, right, the power of the Blops, the brand power here is so great that it doesn't matter what these versions are like. We'll just make it cheaper and it'll be fine. That is super, super dangerous thinking in my mind. That's how you damage a big brand. It's how you go like, okay, we can put out this hugely compromised version of it, but because it's got the name on it, everyone will buy it anyway. And they might do, but this is how you screw yourself over 5-6 years down the line when you start to alienate people from the brand.
Yeah, I actually completely agree with you. I like to think of the children here, and honestly, there are going to be some 9 and 10-year-olds who are really disappointed when they get COD Blops 3 for Christmas, and it doesn't have a single player, and their parents are going to be sad because their kids are going to be sad on Christmas Day. And I'm sure this has happened to me. I'm sure this happened to you. Like, sort of, you're a kid. You're not completely educated about it. Your parents don't know about it. They buy you this thing that you think is the whole deal, and you don't get a hugely important part of the package. So actually, I'm surprised to see you going that strongly that this could damage a brand, but I'm actually with you.
Yeah, I mean, you tend to characterize me as always saying that people need to be a bit more cavalier and extend their brand. When you've got something like this that is a massive franchise that people are very aware of, I think you have to be so careful about how you handle it. I mean, the absolute classic for me is kind of Rock Band. I know that's slightly different because it's a bit faddy in some ways, but they really just like absolutely milked that to death. And it died, and it's only now that they're thinking about bringing it back in an interesting form. Whereas I think if they'd been a bit more careful with it, they could have had a more consistent return over the intervening years where it died a horrendous death, right through to now when you've got these kind of interesting technical innovations happening with it again. So I just think you have to be careful.
Yeah, I think that's a great comparison. I will tell you how I think this could be much worse. I think that if you were to say which part of Call of Duty is the best, you would say the multiplayer. I think if they were just releasing the single player, which I think has happened in the past with other games in situations like this, if it was just the single player, I think that'd be much worse. Because in general, the single player of these games is not amazing, nothing really to write home about, and certainly nowhere near as good and as polished and as progressive as the multiplayer. I think that would be a much worse skew. And I think it would also be harder to communicate. Like if they have on the box Call of Duty Black Ops 3 multiplayer edition or something like that, I have no idea if they will do that.
Yeah.
If they do that, I think that's relatively easy to communicate and sort of more easy in a lot of ways than sort of single player edition. I don't know why I think that, but I do.
Yeah, I was going to say that actually I think it's hard to communicate, unless they do what you just said and they say, multiplayer only, no single player campaign in massive
Which
letters
they're not going to want to do.
Right, and also people still won't get it, even if they do that, because, people who buy things in stores are not... They do not have their brain switched on because they're just wandering around the store and they see a thing they like. They go, "Ooh, I'm going to buy that because it feels good." And
parents have no idea.
Right.
What
they don't know
these words mean.
Exactly, they don't know what the words mean. So I worry about this, but I definitely sympathise with the need to put out a SKU on these platforms. I kind of wonder if they should just have done it properly, remake the campaign with the same geometry and whatever, and then just, make assets that will run on those platforms.
Yeah, I think they were saying that one of the problems is that the single player is very co-op focused, which caused some problems. But yeah, I agree with you. Although that idea, having to play co-op Call of Duty single player, does terrify me a little bit. But
yes.
But we say no to this one, EA.
Yeah, no. Robert Radiator Yang's most recent game, Rinse and Repeat, has joined one of his other games, Cobra Club, in being banned from being streamed on Twitch. According to Twitch, the games were banned because nudity is, quote, a core focus or feature of the game. While Yang acknowledges the presence of nudity in his games, he feels that there should be an exception for cases in which it serves a clear artistic purpose, and that his games qualify in this respect. This is interesting. Ian Hollingham, are Twitch getting in the way of art?
Sorry, I just want to go back and correct myself. I do not think Call of Duty is published by EA. Are Twitch getting in the way of art? So I've had a look at this guy's games. Mm-hmm. They're pretty sexualized.
Yes.
And Twitch's policy is that they don't want you to be showing games that are about sex and nudity. They don't mind if it's Metal Gear Solid 5 or if it's Mass Effect 3 and that there is bits of nudity or even bits of sex at certain points. They just don't want you to be showing games where sex and nudity are the core ideas. And I think that's kind of all right. One of the most interesting things about this article was that it talks about the nudity and sexual content policy on some other streaming sites. And it made me realise that, in this weird future, every single site's got to have its own policy on this kind of stuff, and everyone's got to choose where they lie. I think this would be kind of a more interesting debate if his games weren't so obviously in this area that's problematic for Twitch.
Right. I mean, it's going to take something like this to challenge it, though. So the main game this is about, Rinse and Repeat, is a game where you're in a shower and then you have to wait until a man comes into the shower, and the schedule for that is randomly generated, which is amazing. And so you wait, and the guy comes in, and you shower him, you clean him, and he says stuff like, "Oh yeah, that feels good, bro." And it's just this guy wearing sunglasses. I think this is great. I'm happy about that. I just want to say that at this point. I'm happy that exists. Twitch have this really difficult problem because what they're trying to do is stop people just putting porn on there in various forms and by stealth, because if that happened, it would be really, really popular, and it would define the service as a kind of porn thing that you go to watch sort of games related porn and people, not wearing many clothes talking about games and stuff. And I understand the need to combat that at every level. I think the porn stream is the making a penis out of Minecraft blocks of the streaming world, and they have to have policies that deal with it. Having said that, Robert Yang is someone who is making stuff where, whatever you think of his stuff, he certainly put a lot of thought and effort into it. This is not trivial. He's not doing this to just be like, willies. He's doing it because he believes that he's making some very sophisticated points, and that's fine. You can engage with that in any way that you want to. And he makes the point that Twitch has a mature flag that you can set on your stream to say, hey, this is for adults. Kids can't get in here and they can't watch this. And he's saying, why can't I just put my stuff behind the mature flag, and then people who want to view it for all the different reasons they're going to view it can do so, and I have a lot of time for that.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is just going to be how are they going to make that not then devolve into porn? The thing that I think is that nowadays, so many of your sales can come from being reviewed by YouTubers and by Twitchers that just you're basically kind of saying something like games magazines in the 90s aren't allowed to review these games, and that's really, really bad. So I think Twitch needs to find a better way of doing it. I mean, Twitch is predominantly about gaming. They might have to do something relatively complicated. They might have to say, as long as this is a review of a game and it's reasonably thus, we are going to allow this. But if it's just sort of meant to titillate and meant for masturbatory purposes, then we are not going to have it. And they may have to just be relatively subjective about that. It does seem clear that right now they are being they're just banning too much.
Right. I mean, I think I conflated two issues, and they don't really do that. One of them is streamers who are doing sexual stuff like alongside games, like not wearing many clothes or whatever, and that's very difficult. And they've had a big battle over that. But their policy is nudity can't be a core focus or feature of the game in question. So it can't be like the main point of the game, and that seems like quite good wording. However, they wouldn't have accounted for this case where the nudity in the game, although it is the core focus, he's kind of making some points about the kind of sexuality and nudity that are allowed in games, and it's provocative and interesting. So I think what they need to do is they need to have part of the mature section should be games that feature nudity, and they can have a clause that says it's up for review as to whether the stream is pornographic or not. If the stream is pornographic, they can have some right to take it down. They can talk to the stream about it, and they can take it down. They can say the intention is not to have a service that's based on pornographic games. And I think, then the argument about is this pornographic or not is very interesting, and it becomes more similar to that sort of argument in film.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And, most of these games, it needs to be possible for you to review them on YouTube and Twitch. And yeah, the question of, I mean, it'd be interesting to see which games, were near the line of pornographic versus not pornographic.
Right, exactly. Interesting topic, that one. Thanks to Boing Boing Offworld for bringing that to our attention. Ever wondered why games cost so much on PSN or Xbox Live compared to retail or Steam? Kotaku UK have a highly informative article on the subject written by Kevin MacDonald. Apparently, prices are largely determined through negotiation with retail channels and distribution, as the retail apparently makes up approximately 80% of sales for console games. They still have a lot of bargaining power. Ian Hardingham, is this retail price model still relevant, or will it eventually collapse?
Well, in the medium and long term, I don't know how much longer retail in general is going to be around, and I mean that I genuinely don't know. I've converted a lot of my buying to online, but there are certain things that I wouldn't even consider getting online at the moment. I had to go and get some paint this weekend so we could paint my daughter's new playhouse, and I absolutely wouldn't have done that online, and I just don't know. So if you say that the high street's going to continue somewhat similarly as it is now for a while, and engage with that, basically the most interesting part of this, something we may have mentioned before, is that the reason that games are as expensive on PSN or Xbox Live as they are in the shops are because the shops need to be kept happy and they need to be kept in business. Otherwise, there'll be nowhere to predominantly, and this is not actually mentioned in the article, but this is what I believe, predominantly to sell new consoles. Because you can imagine a lot of people going online to buy games, and that just getting more and more and more dominant. But when you're buying new consoles, that's still where a lot of the Christmas action happens. A lot of the less hardcore gamer action happens is in the shops. So the shops have to be kept alive, and they have to be kept happy so that they can put the PS4 and the Xbox One right at the front of their store and do a lot of advertising for you.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, I definitely agree that's a factor, and I'd be interested in someone, exploring that. That's something that you've been saying for a long time, and it's definitely significant. You can see what the sort of traffic in those shops is like. It's still very concentrated concentrated around Christmas. So that's got to mean, that you're right. There's a lot of value in that. This is really weird to me because it shows me how crazy this system was. I mean, we were trying to engage with it at one point where we were thinking about retail titles, and someone from the publisher Koch Media was very kind, when we were kind of new devs. He sort of sat down with me and went like, look, this is how retail works, and he sent me all of these figures and breakdowns for some of their titles just to kind of educate me. And I remember when I learned about that, you think, wow, it's really hard for publishers and developers to make money. Everyone characterized the publishers as these sort of evil money-grabbing people, but actually the cost involved here are really significant. You have to make the discs, you have to store them, you have to put them in trucks, you have to get them out, you have to pay the company that does that, you've got to put marketing, and marketing's factored into every disc that's sold, has a little chunk of it that goes for marketing. So it's still tremendously difficult, and it's just gonna die. There's no way around this. It makes no sense to sell games physically now in any way whatsoever. I think that stores which generally sell games hardware will still exist, and you'll be able to buy games along with the hardware, but a place where you kind of walk in and you have all these empty boxes on shelves, it's just madness. So I'm kind of really ready for the death of retail now.
Yeah, I guess you're probably right. That's how it's sort of going with DVDs and music to a certain extent, and if it's going to go that direction there, it's going to go that direction with games, that's for sure. A couple of interesting facts here. This kind of information is relatively well known, but we'll talk about it anyway. It's still kind of shocking that for a £50 game, the developer is only getting between £3 and £5 usually of that game.
Yeah.
And you can see why that's only going to work at very high numbers, basically. So we're all very happy that the PC has already made this transition and we're able to sell things on Steam and we don't have to sell 1 million copies to make a profit. So that's really good. One of the most interesting facts that was buried in this article is some data on what percentage of their revenue each major publisher has for digital revenues versus retail. So EA are apparently about 50% digital revenues as of 2014. For Take-Two, that's 32%. Activision, about 30% as well. And Ubisoft, about 8 to 12%. So I don't know why Ubisoft is so much lower. Or even if that data is at all accurate. But I hadn't heard anything like that before, and that's quite interesting.
No, that's very surprising. Yeah, it would be interesting to delve into that further. I mean, it's sort of, you risk heavy speculation by kind of going there. I think with this, one of the things that I really want to happen, and I don't know if it will happen economically, is these chain stores to die out and more sort of bespoke, random boutique style shops to come in, where you have a mix of retro games, which it makes sense to sell physically, and kind of new games kind of bolted onto that. So maybe games that have interesting collector's editions that you want to go and see in the store, that come with merchandise, that come with interesting boxes. And the kind of more traditional game store space, maybe it's combined with like a LAN cafe where you can go and watch esports. Maybe it's part of something like the National Video Games Arcade. I know that they're thinking of having a shop. So we might see, what I'm really hoping happens with the high street in general is that we see a return to shops that are more interesting, and all of the chain stuff kind of goes online.
Yeah, I mean, I basically agree that those shops are a lot more exciting, and I think they'll probably get to a place where there's sort of one in the bigger cities, like there are with sort of really interesting games, traditional games and comic shops, etc. And that would be really cool. I mean, I've never had much love for Game, or GameStop. These places are really sort of boring. I mean, I think the old Electronics Boutique had a bit more character to it than Game did, but nowadays I just can't really imagine going to a store to get a game. I mean, apart from anything else, when you have a DVD in your console, it's really noisy.
Yeah, it's
I mean, it's just the most bizarre thing. It's just like, that's a reason to spend £10 more online. Another thing that isn't talked about very often here, one of the reasons this really annoys people in the UK is that you have to pay £50 or £60, Lord help us sometimes, for these games on PSN. But if you go to Game, you can get them for a significant discount. And something that's not that common knowledge is that's actually really much more true in the UK than anywhere else in Europe, or a little bit less in the States as well. apparently the UK has a much more competitive retail space than Europe does, and quite big discounts, even of new games, are really common here and not at all in places such as France and Spain and Italy. So all these things are kind of interesting, and obviously it's much more annoying for us because we both, I think, had an experience with Metal Gear Solid 5 where we looked at it at £60, and I was like, but if I, get off my ass and go into town centre and get it for 45, and I just decided to drink a beer and buy it online instead. But yeah, I mean, and finally, as PC gamers predominantly, we're not used to spending £50 and £60 on new games. We're used to spending £35, really. And those numbers still seem massively different to me. So I'm glad I can afford to buy Metal Gear Solid for £60. I don't buy a lot of PlayStation 4 titles, but it's still a lot of money.
It's really interesting having a reason to go to a game shop, like an actual reason, and I kind of quite enjoy that. Like, so you look at these new titles that come out on PSN, and you think, the next time I'm in Sainsbury's, I can go and have a look and see if they have it. And that brought back so much, there's so much of the romance of like being the relative scarcity of something. It's like sometimes they arbitrarily won't have it. And then you have to decide whether you go somewhere else or not to get it. And honestly, like there is a bit of fun involved there. So I haven't minded this thing of like, do I want to take the hit and be lazy and get it for this stupid price, or go into stores? Like, a lot of people complain about that. I mean, yes, sure, there's justifiable complaints. Some people can't go to stores, etc. There's a lot of issues there. But equally, like, if you are able to go to stores, you have the choice. It's kind of fun.
Yeah, although I really get upset when I go to Game and the only thing they want to sell me is disc insurance. and it's just so annoying. It's like, no, thank you. I don't want to be horribly rude to you, but actually I don't want to pay £5 to insure this disc for this game that I'm probably not going to be playing in 2 weeks anyway. And it's really dirty to me.
Well, shout out to Game Leamington Spa and Game Telford, the most active game stores on Twitter. I've never been offered disc insurance at Game Leamington Spa.
Because
those people know what's up. They know what's up. They're good people, and they are running. They're doing their best actually to make that game into a proper game store where like you can have a proper conversation about games and things like that. So shout out to the people who work in game, because I know a lot of you are putting in effort to make the experience a bit better than your corporate overlords might necessarily have designed.
Midlands Game getting it done.
That's right. Cloud Imperium Games have a pre-order available on their site for a Star Citizen modding manual. It costs $12 and will apparently be made available close to release. It also appears that mods will only be supported on private servers. Is this pricing necessary to provide documentation for something as niche as modding on private servers? And is it an acceptable alternative to not providing modding tools at all?
There's a lot going on here,
yes.
Paul Kilduff Taylor. There is a lot going on here. I was notified of this by Derek Smart's Twitter feed,
yes,
which I follow and spends most of its time reporting, shall we say, on the goings on at Roberts Space Industries. That's the company that makes Star Citizen. And I'm starting to wonder if there's some fire along with this smoke that Derek Smart is blowing around, because there are a couple of quite concerning stories going on, and charging $12 for a modding manual, it just seems very strange to me. I've looked into it, and it does not appear this is a case of $12 for the hard copy and you can get the soft copy for free. That does not appear to be the case. And, I mean, at this point, do they really need to keep nickel and diming us, given how much money they've made?
Yeah, this is like, you can't charge money for something that's against the spirit of the thing that it's intended to be. Modding is supposed to be this creative space where people can make free stuff and, and then maybe kind of build that into a product later. So charging them money, I mean, $12, this is information about programming, and we all know that should be free. I mean, even the most hardcore kind of copyright bashing people understand the benefit of code stuff being free and available to all. I mean, I looked at the forum thread that you linked, which I presume Derek Smart had linked, and the original page for this modder's manual now has been taken down. It's just 404s on the Cloud Imperium Games site, so maybe they're kind of reading the backlash. But I was saying to you the other day, like, this is getting to the point where I'm really tempted to back this game just to kind of get in on this drama. It's the source of... We've talked about it almost every week. I just don't know what they can do next. Have they exhausted their potential for crazy drama?
Well, I don't think that they have. I mean,
No.
The story this weekend on Mr. Smart's Twitter feed was that there was quite a lot of firings and redundancies going on, which hasn't been reported in the main media yet this week. So maybe that's just incorrect. But I think that there is, like I say, just a little bit too much smoke, and there might be some problems here. I want to take up producer Jim Air on something.
Okay.
I see he's inserted this into the intro. It also appears that mods will only be supported on private servers. Now, that's not a news item to me. As someone who runs a multiplayer game and understands quite well how difficult it is to support mods on public servers, on the servers that you run yourself, that's fine. I'm not going to give them too much of a hard time for that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, again, with all this stuff, I always want to insert this caveat that, like, Chris Roberts has made some of my favourite games of all time. I mean, of all time, he's an amazing game designer, a visionary game designer, and he's done some crazy stuff. But this is just, like, I just don't know what's going on anymore with this. He seems to be unbelievably silent on all of these issues that people raise, and I think the mainstream press is just kind of getting a bit jaded about, like, oh, the next Star Citizen thing today is this. So Derek Smart being on the case is just not a turn of events I would have anticipated. I mean, is Phil Fish going to get involved next? I can't, basically.
That would be excellent. I'm beginning to think that this is going to be bad. I'm actually. It sounds that the massive amount of stuff that's going on right now is actually a distraction to the developers. Not just Mr. Smart, but actually a lot of articles recently published have been much more negative about it. And if you look at the actual quality of some of the stuff that's been put out so far, and the vast amount of work they have to do, and the difficulty of controlling the budget, even when they've got that much money, I'm getting significantly more pessimistic of this being a game that gets more than 82% anywhere.
Wow, let's see. I mean, will it even be a game? Won't it? It might be 5 different games. We just don't know. Valve have wiped all Steam user reviews for RPG Epic Quest of the Four Crystals after it emerged that the developers Rose Petal Games were offering the game for free to users who are willing to leave a review in exchange. It appears that Valve objected to the lack of disclosure in the reviews. Would this be acceptable even with proper disclosure?
No. The value of a user review, comes from the fact that the user has paid for it.
Yeah.
Your experience of something is going to be very, very different if you get it for free or if you pay for it. So, no.
I think it's that straightforward as well. I think, look, stop trying to game the system on Steam, please, other developers. Like, just stop messing around with it. These things are supposed to be about... If you make a good game, you'll get good reviews, and you'll get some bad reviews, and it doesn't matter. The fact that we have this forum that people can vent stuff, I actually like Steam user reviews, and I read all the bad ones of our games, and some of them are hilariously silly, and I can ignore them, and some of them are angry, but they make very good points, so I like them as a source of information, and I just don't think you need to mess around with this. There are so many people who think there are these kind of clever tricks to stuff like, how do I get my game through Greenlight, or how do I get my... And it's not clever tricks, it's making something good and then applying like common sense principles to how you bring that good thing to people. There's no secret weird trick that dentists hate.
Steam is currently a meritocracy. When it stops being a meritocracy, we will be the first people to start talking about the problems that is causing. But if you make a game that's good enough, and quite specifically is also attractive to a lot of people, which is important to widespread success, then you will get noticed on Steam. I think that's definitely true. I think user reviews are functioning quite well, and I think that they're very, very important for early access games, because people need to know what state the early access game is in. And I think it's probably pushing people to release some higher quality stuff in early access as well. So yeah, I mean, yeah, everyone's going to game systems. That's fine. People are trying to game the App Store for time immemorial. As long as it's sort of something that's as easy to deal with as this, I don't necessarily have a problem. But yeah, it seems like sort of preaching, but just make something really great that you really believe in, and you'll get good reviews.
Yeah, I'm not going to go as far as to say it's a full meritocracy. I mean, especially because then you start to get into definitions of what's good. But I mean, I largely take the point there. Like, it's... If you make something that's going to be popular, it's going to be popular. If making something popular is your aim. I do have some issues with some developers who make things that are clearly obscure in some way and then go, well, my game isn't as popular as Rocket League. And that's a problem with Steam. That's definitely some thinking there that isn't right. Having said that, the current system does cause some interesting things to get buried. I just think that's very rare, actually. So although I wouldn't go as far as you, I think we pretty much agree.
No, I'm glad I've got you around to temper my hyperbole. You're right. There are lots and lots and lots of definitions of meritocracy for which it's not. You know, it's still true that more popular IP and more popular developers will do better, and that is often against the ideas of meritocracy. So yes, we agree.
A controversial pre-order scheme for the upcoming Deus Ex sequel/prequel Mankind Divided has been scrapped. Mankind. The idea behind the scheme was to encourage sales by providing better and better rewards based on a total number of pre-orders made, culminating in being allowed to play the game 4 days before the general release date. This isn't the first time this has been tried. XCOM Enemy Unknown did something very similar for their pre-orders on Steam. Are people objecting to this as a concept, or more specifically the effective delay of the release for people who didn't pre-order?
I lost the will to live while you were describing this scheme.
Yeah.
Pre-order schemes are so boring.
Yeah.
And the fact that the massive payoff for this, you get to play the game 4 days before release.
Oh my god.
I mean, honestly, it's really cynical, actually, and it's really horrible, and I'm glad they've cancelled it. It's just really boring. I mean, if the game's ready 4 days before the general release date, how about you just be nice to your fans and do it? Don't require that 100,000 of them have bought it. It's actually pretty bad. I remember there's something a little bit similar to this. When Portal 2 came out, it was at the end of, I think, a big Steam sale or something, and Steam had this thing where if people solved these puzzles or something or other, maybe it was just puzzles and not a Steam sale related thing, anyway, that the game would come out 4 days early, I think, and I was excited about that because I actually wanted to play Portal 2 over this weekend that my wife happened to be away on. And I think it was to do with sort of solving some riddles or something, and that was a little bit better. But honestly, games.
I've been watching a lot of Seinfeld recently, early Seinfeld, and there's an episode in the first season called The Pony Incident, where Jerry Seinfeld goes to an old woman's birthday party, and he makes an offhand remark about the kind of people that have ponies. And the old woman looks around and very scathingly said, "I had a pony." And that's what pre-ordering is. Pre-ordering is the pony. And what they've done with this game is they've kind of just inadvertently, they've done the pony remark by having a pre-order in the first place, and then they've done exactly what Jerry Seinfeld does in every episode of Seinfeld, which is that he makes everything worse by adding stuff to it. So they've hit on the offensive thing, and they've just made it as offensive as you could possibly make it in that kind of Larry David style by just adding details. So what is the thing that people get annoyed about most? It's messing around with release dates. So not only have they done this in a way that an individual person can't control, you can't pay more to get a different release date. And my voice is dying here, but this is important. This is an important point. You can't take something that's already offensive and then just make it more offensive by like topping it with more.
Yeah, while you were saying that, I think I thought of a more offensive thing. If the number of pre-orders in your territory decreased the price in your territory but increased it in others, so it was competitive
Right.
Pre-ordering.
Yes.
You could make it expensive for other people as well. That would be worse. So why don't you try that one next?
You got to stop doing this. People already hate pre-ordering, and the problem with this is that the stuff around pre-ordering AAA has hurt indie development. This is a rare case of where that's actually happened. People are now against pre-ordering, and a lot of indie games originally were founded on this pre-order beta idea, and the developers worked really hard to make sure the betas were good. I remember we did that in 2011, Natural Selection 2 did that in 2011, Gratuitous Space Battles did that. You know, it's about being very careful with that. And between a load of idiots who've released nonsense on early access and this stuff turning people off the idea of pre-orders, what's happened is you've actually wrecked a really important and interesting way that people could support good game development. So well done, AAA, for that.
Bringing the fire today.
Right, that's the end of the main body of the show, and it's the time when I get to relax for a bit, which I apparently need. It's Ian's Magic Corner, where Ian talks about Magic the Gathering, so please take it away, Ian.
Hello everyone, welcome to Ian's Magic Corner. This is not a terribly well-researched Magic Corner this week, but we're going to talk about artificial intelligence in CCGs, and specifically Magic the Gathering and Hex. We have to celebrate Hex, because Hex, which is a online-only sort of indie-ish CCG, has just settled out of court with Wizards of the Coast. I hear that it's a game that's very much like Magic, but getting a little bit less like Magic as it develops. I don't think it's fully released yet, which may be one of the reasons that it's no longer being sued by Wizards. Wizards don't have a problem with CCGs taking a lot of stuff from Magic. They just don't want direct clones, and as I understand it, Hex was for a while a pretty direct clone. So anyway, there was an article on Rock Paper Shotgun today, which was an interview with one of the main guys, and they were talking about the artificial intelligence. I talked to Visiting the Village Magic the Gathering correspondent Tom Richards a lot about AI in Magic the Gathering, because it's a very strange thing to not have been progressed further, so especially by the amateur crowd. There are lots of programmers who play Magic the Gathering, and trying to make an AI to play Magic is a very attractive idea, and you've got these databases of all the cards that you'd be able to plug straight into. So I'm pretty sure that Occam's razor on why this hasn't happened is because it's very, very, very difficult. I think that there are two things that are difficult, and the biggest sort of barrier to entry is that just coding a simulator that can play Magic at all, that can just effectively use the cards, is actually very hard. For all that it's a card game, Magic the Gathering is very, very complicated. It has unbelievably large different number of mechanics, and even the base progression, the stack, etc., is more complicated than you might imagine. So if someone ever came out with a open source thing which just allowed you to sort of mechanically play cards and play turns and play matches of Magic, then I think that would then lead to eventually like a big improvement in the AI scene. As it is, it's really just the AI in Duels of the Planeswalkers that exists, and it's okay, but it's not very good. Are you still with me?
I am still with you, yes.
That's good.
Yeah.
Now, Hex has recorded the full data of every match that's ever been played online, and what they're trying to do is use machine learning based on matches for their AI, which is a really interesting thing to do. When you do something very brute force and kind of non-detail oriented like that, you're basically saying, in situations like this, with these cards available, people tended to play a card like this. So it's not analysing at all what's going to happen, what's likely to happen, what the cards are like. You're just looking at, hundreds of thousands of games that have been played and saying, well, this is what I'm going to use based on all that stuff. I think that's interesting. I kind of slightly doubt that's going to be very good, to be perfectly honest. I think they might need millions and millions and millions of existing matches to train that well enough. But I'll be interested to see how it does.
Also, on principle, that's not going to be able to respond to metagame changes at all. Because once the metagame changes, you'd need to run that again on all of the new matches where people make different types of decisions, surely.
A very cogent point. They address that very slightly, saying that new cards, that they have like a sort of a similarity mechanism that allows the AI to work out what new cards are a bit like, or what two old cards new cards are like. But that kind of thing could sort of massively undermine it. I mean,
sorry, carry on.
Yeah, what Magic, the ideal form that an AI for this would take is that it would be able to say it knows the whole game state, and that includes all of the cards everywhere, including in your decks, etc. Say that at one time it knows that. If you can have an engine that then works out the right thing to do based on perfect knowledge, and do it in less than 7 million hours, then you can run a very popular kind of AI, which basically doesn't cheat, it doesn't know what the game state is, but it starts guessing what the game state might be based on lots of different things, and it just does that as many times as it can, and it looks at what the best things to do are, and then after it's done it enough times, it can start to work out what the best thing to do is based on the fact it doesn't know everything.
Yeah.
Now that's that's really quite easy to program if you have the ability to play through a hand, and it's conceptually very easy and it's very effective. The reason why they're not doing that is because it really does take an unbelievably large amount of time, even with perfect knowledge, to work out what to do, because the synergies and the number of different ways you can play just a single sort of four card hand in one turn is getting up sort of thousands and thousands and thousands, so it's almost impossible. But at one point, there will be computers fast enough to do it, and that's where we're going, I think.
Yeah. Okay, well, this is really interesting, actually, because I've always thought about those things with machine learning. Like, a lot of people sort of trumpet this as a great method for stuff, and I know that you've traditionally been against that style in AI design. I always think that in some ways it's not helpful to ever look at what a human does when you're designing AIs, but humans have these sets of inbuilt rules that they develop that are very hardcore, that are kind of like, in this sort of situation, I generally do this. And that's much more of the style you just described, where it's kind of, given perfect knowledge of the game, I would do this, and I am assuming that the state is such and such. But then they temper that with a kind of learning where, if they repeatedly do something and it goes wrong, they will adapt away from that, whether rationally or irrationally. And I do wonder about like a kind of a hybrid thing where you're able to establish rules for the AI, but then it looks contextually at the results of those decisions in general over time. I don't know if that's ever been done. I presume it has.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about a different kind of learning paradigm for sure, which is different than the sort of static analysis of looking at a huge number of things that have already happened, and can be integrated into any other kind of AI, because it can weight things based on how good it looks analytically and how it's performed in the past. So that's generally good. I mean, when you're just doing, and people have done this with first-person shooter bots, they've looked at reams of multiplayer data and tried to use that to learn. And the problem with that is, and I have to say, I'm not an expert on this subject, so if I'm being fallacious on this, please tell me. But basically, it's just really inflexible. That either works really well, or it doesn't work really well. And it's very hard to do anything with it. It's like, that data's there, that learning thing is there. If that's worked out and created an entertaining thing to play against, then good. But if it hasn't, there's nothing you can do. And the key here is still, it's important not to forget this, is to make an AI that's entertaining to play against. If you think about Worms, there was a perfect AI in Worms, and it wasn't entertaining to play against, because there's just nothing you can do against someone who's going to hit every single shot. A perfect AI in Bridge, though, is really cool, because you want to be playing against the very best. In a first-person shooter, you don't want someone who's going to hit every shot, who has the exact knowledge of how long it's going to get you to cross a room. You want something that's more human-like, and certainly in games like Frozen Synapse, it's very unclear what the most interesting kind of opponent is. That's something I think about a lot. So you've got to do it on a game by game basis.
One thing that bothers me about this kind of AI and thinking about it is that I don't want to play this kind of mode against an AI. I only want AI and sort of single player experiences of things which are radically different from competitive games. I'm just not really that interested in a competitive AI. Like, I'd never play a match, like a multiplayer match of StarCraft against a bot AI. Like, why would you? That would be fundamentally uninteresting. And maybe that's because of the style of AI that's done. I mean, it would be really nice to have an AI that could allow you to practice certain situations. Now that would be very cool, and I would use that. But in general, I don't want to play full matches against AIs.
Yeah, it's a very weird line there. Because, I mean, I like playing bridge matches against the AI. I really enjoy that. That's enough for me. I think bridge is kind of more of a game, as a lot of it is about just you playing excellently, and not as much about interacting with your opponent as, say, StarCraft 2 is.
Yeah.
And that's probably true of CCGs as well. I mean, what you want the challenge to be clear, and you want it to be interesting, and that's why single player experiences have levels of opponents that you get through. Like, I'm thinking about Unreal Tournament single player, there are lots of different levels of bots, and you try and progress. Like racing games have that kind of thing. I think that whereas against a human, it's enough to just win and compete, and that's exciting. There has to maybe be a bit more context against computers.
Right. Okay, that's the end of that. Now it's time for a new, perhaps not regular item on the show that I'm going to call Paul's Smash Corner. So I talk about Smash Brothers a lot, and now I'm going to get to talk about it in a formal setting. And I thought in the spirit of Ian's Magic Corner, I would take a development in the game and explain it, and then we can try discussing it. So the absolute huge news in the Smash community is that Nintendo, without any preamble, released a massive patch that has completely changed the nature of the game. It's version 1.1.1, which is amazing in itself. And the change that has caused all this ruckus is a change to Shield Stun. So I'm going to explain what Shield Stun is. Shields in Smash Brothers stop attacks, basically what happens when you block. So when you're in Shield, nothing can hit you apart from a grab, which can pull you out of the shield, or an unblockable attack, which some characters have, but are actually pretty rare in the game and generally very hard to land. So your shield decreases over time, so you can't just sit there holding it up. It gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and it also decreases when you block an attack with it. When your shield is broken, so either by one of those unblockable attacks or because it's been whittled down or you've just held it down for a long time, your character goes into a really massive stun. You get like stars going around your head, you go into a dizzy state, and you can't move or do an attack. That's basically incredibly terrible. You will usually lose a round in which you've been stunned to that extent, I would say. So in a situation where player A has their shield up, and then player B comes in and hits them with an attack, which is blocked, player A's shield will diminish, and they'll go into what's called shield stun, which is basically a form of lag. It means you can't do anything. So this kind of reduces what in fighting game terms are called punish options. So you block an attack, and in some situations you can't immediately hit back with another attack. And patch 1.1.1 has massively increased shield stun. So there's kind of three main implications of this. One of them is a type of move called a shield lock, which is really devastating. This is a move which basically puts you into an infinite loop of shield stun. It means you inevitably get dizzy. Lucario has this projectile called Aura Sphere that he can charge. So if he goes next to you in a specific situation, charges the Aura Sphere, that player will get an automatic dizzy. So that's really huge. You have to do something really, really specific to get out of that. It's also led to an increase in what's called safety for certain moves. So it means that you can do a move and have it get blocked without it being bad for you. Finally, there are changes to the neutral game, so stuff like projectiles that characters fire, their ability to deal with projectiles, and their ability to approach the other player has been changed. All of this has served to make the game more aggressive. Smash 4 is a very defensive game that relied on shielding and dodging a lot, and now it's changed. I went online yesterday without realising that this patch had been applied, and everyone I played was crazily aggressive all the time, and I won quite a few matches just by sitting back and reading people's very repetitive, weird approaches. It was like they were players who were not used to a very approach-centric game playing that way. So I thought it was so interesting that they decided to bring out a patch of this magnitude now at the life cycle of the game, and I wondered if anything similar had ever happened and if you made anything of this.
Yeah, I mean, so on the one hand, I'm right in thinking that this is fundamentally a simple increase of a variable. Is that right?
Yeah, I believe they changed the algorithm by which shield stun time is determined, but effectively It just makes shield stun longer for all of the cast.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty interesting. It sounds like a very meaningful rebalance.
Yeah.
I nothing's immediately coming to mind, but I can think of times when a successful game, the company that developed it is really wanting to have like a big change, and it often is to make it more aggressive. I remember when Tribes 2 changed the rules, so you got like a fraction of a point for grabbing the flag, so it's capture the flag game.
Yeah.
And they wanted to make it more aggressive by giving you sort of basically a tiebreaker of the team that had got more flag grabs, and that's quite big. But obviously, this sounds, to be honest, like significantly bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that generally it seems that games tend to want to become more aggressive, competitive games, that tends to be what's more interesting. And if I think about defense in general, it tends to be something which always gets sidelined in favor of offense because it's more exciting, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, something for me that is a problem. I mean, my character I play Zero Suit Samus, and she has the main weakness in her game is approaching. So if you get a character like Link who has 3 different types of projectile, like a shit Link player will just sit at the side of the stage, like farting out these 3 projectiles over and over and over and over again. So to approach that, one of the main things that I learned, which is how good players tell you should deal with this, is that you run into the middle of the stage and you shield their projectile, and then you move forward and you shield the next one, you move forward and you shield the next one. Now, because they've changed shield stun, it means that I could run into the middle of the stage, shield, block the projectile, but then the Link player can come in and grab me. And that situation can repeat over and over again. So although the intention is to kind of make the game faster and more aggressive, like, it could really increase weird campy play. That could easily be a downside of the change, I think.
Yeah, I guess we'll have to see how it plays out,
Yeah.
and they can always like put it down by 50%.
Yeah.
Nintendo are so inscrutable. Like,
Yes.
It's not surprising when they do really surprising things because of how crazy they are.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you should keep us updated on this.
I will definitely keep you updated on this. One of the things that it might change is the dominance. At the moment, there are basically one character, Sheik, is massively better than all of the others, despite people's arguments about that. I mean, it's absolutely clear if you just play that character why that would be the case. And it may change that potentially, although there are some things about this that could benefit Sheik. So yes, I will keep you updated. Right, it's time for the games that were released this week in 2005, thanks to Eurogamer. I think we'll blitz through these. So on the 30th of September 2005, we had Sniper Elite on the PS2 and PC, which is a Rebellion game. We heard a lot about that from Visiting the Village Rebellion correspondent Rich Whitelock. Sonic Gems Collection on the PS2 and GameCube. Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas. Oogie's Revenge on the Xbox and PS2. Beat Down Fist of Vengeance on the Xbox and PS2. Conflict Global Storm on the Xbox, PS2 and PC. Evil Dead Regeneration. I'm going to stop reading out platforms, I don't care. Let's just throw caution to the wind. FIFA 06. Advance Wars Dual Strike. Now, Advance Wars Dual Strike was the DS version of Advance Wars, which was pretty good, I believe.
Yeah, you had that, didn't you? I played that a fair amount.
I played it a bit. I played much more Advance Wars on the GBA than I did on the DS, I have to say.
In fact, I've played all of the next 3 DS games. I played Advance Wars, I played Castlevania Dawn of Sorrow a lot,
Yep.
and quite liked it, and I played Madden NFL 2006, so
Yeah.
look at that relevance.
So a bonanza time for the DS. Bounty Hounds on the PSP. I don't know what that is, but it's a good name. There's a lot of good assonance going on there. Bounty Hounds. Far Cry Instincts on the Xbox. Did you play that?
No, I played the bonus Far Cry thing on the Wii,
Yeah.
which was really fun in multiplayer because the control system was really stupid, and I really liked that. I don't know how related that is to Far Cry Instincts, though.
I remember that. That was that weird Wiimote. That was the, like, can people do an FPS on the Wii game? I remember that. It was weird.
Yeah.
Gungrave Overdose, which I can't remember what that is. Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks. There are so many of these weird Mortal Kombat games. There's a brilliant... Retsupre did a really good Let's Play of one of the absolute worst Mortal Kombat. This kind of, like, brawler platformer thing, which had FMV. It's absolutely amazing. Go and look at that, Retsupre. Rome Total War Barbarian Invasion. Come on, please. ER the Game, which has not been talked about. I don't know if that's, like, quick time events where you have to, like, do earnest looks as Noah Weil, because that would be pretty good. Bet on Soldier. Did you have Bet on Soldier?
No, I've just looked it up. It's not like a gambling game. It's a game about a post-apocalyptic future where people bet on soldiers. It's not a game that you can bet on. Median score of 71%.
That's the most literal game name ever. It's like you could
It
call it
is.
like Jumpy Dungarees Man. You know, it's
Yeah.
Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Lockdown on the GameCube. There's a Rainbow Six game on the GameCube. Excellent. The GameCube is like... need to get some more GameCube games. Yeti Sport Arctic Adventures, which was that Flash game that they ported to the Xbox. Well, that is a weird week. I wouldn't have known where I was in that week.
That's a lot of games.
I know it is a lot of games. Anything you'd like to pick up on from that week that I breezed over?
No, not really. I was just kind of in a daze while listening to them. Those DS games, like what we've talked about before, this is really the start of the DS, and I was such a huge DS fan at the time. And yeah, like Castlevania games, they never seem quite freeform and emergent enough for me. The Metroidvania stuff, but I kind of got into that, and it was very pretty.
Yeah.
So that's nice.
Okay. Now it's time to catapult ourselves into the present with the top 10 UK Steam games currently. So at number 10, it's Sniper Elite 3 plus the Season Pass. I'm sure that's some kind of anniversary thing. CSGO, number 9. Tomb Raider, the reboot one. Thanks, producer Jimmy. 80% off at number 8. It should have been called that. Might and Magic Heroes of number 7 at number 7. Which is amazingly poetic. Grand Theft Auto 5 at number 6. Sniper Elite Trilogy 81% off. That's a good arbitrary discount there. Congratulations on that. Tomb Raider Collection 80% off at number 4. Number 3 is Arma 3 Extended Edition at 50% off. Number 2 is Sniper Elite 3 at 80% off. It's just, I mean, wow. Go Rebellion. Number 1, Arma 3 at 50% off. What a boring ass top 10 that is. I don't even want to talk about that. Let's move on.
Okay.
Right. Listener questions, and we have one from Ian Hardingham, who is a regular listener, and he says, what do we think about the bonus point rule in World Cup Rugby?
Yeah, I'll talk about this really quickly. It's not all that interesting. In World Cup Rugby, you get an extra standings point if you score 4 tries.
Really?
Yeah, and the reason I bring it up is because it's actually super rare that you get league points for kind of quality of victory. I was told by Mr. Richards that county cricket allows that, but one of the main reasons for that is that the draws are so common. So yeah, I was a bit surprised by it, really. I mean, in general, it's been found that, it's been found, but leagues want to make single games very meaningful, and, you don't want to reward people for running up at the score at the end, or because the opponents gave up, or it seems really weird to me.
Yeah, this really seems like something you would design, like trying to encourage good play by this sort of abstracted point that you get somewhere else. I mean, yeah, I guess trying to encourage scoring tries is good, because the last thing you want is for rugby to devolve into a pure kicking game, and there have been some eras where that's nearly been true. I think we're not in one of those currently. I can't watch the World Cup. This is one of the only disadvantages of not having proper terrestrial TV, which we talked about before, is that I can't actually watch the World Cup in an easy way live.
Sucks.
So I did see a bit of an Ireland game where they were absolutely destroying Romania, and it kind of reminded me how fun rugby is. Yeah, I guess I'm not against this. I think scoring more tries is good. Cool. I want to talk about something which is not related to rugby. It's not even related to anything. It's about the Twitter comedian Fart, aka John Hendren, and he got invited on a news channel to talk about Edward Snowden. But instead of talking about Edward Snowden, he just talked about Edward Scissorhands. And Vice interviewed him about this, but you really need to look at, if you haven't seen this yet, do go look at it, because the anchor asked him a question about Edward Snowden, and he says to cast him out, making him invalid to society simply because he had scissors for hands. People didn't get scared until he started sculpting shrubs into dinosaur shapes and whatnot. And she then just carries on and asks him another question about Edward Snowden, and he says Edward Scissorhands is a complete hero to me. So I just want to, Fart is a legend of Twitter comedy. I've been happy to interact with him on several occasions, and I just wanted to applaud this. This is what we need. We need more of this. How are these channels not vetting people before they go on? And it's the fact that she keeps going. It's a thing of great beauty, and I recommend it entirely. Do you have any comment?
No, just applause from us.
Well done. Well done, Fart. Some of your listener questions now. Mia Dragovicevic says, what do you think we can do to help game devs educate themselves better about the non-game dev side of making games? I butchered the question, but he means stuff that isn't just, designing, making games, stuff like he was responding to my key reselling article, like kind of educating people about that. And to be honest, I feel that's what Gamasutra is. A lot of stuff on Gamasutra is about some of this meta stuff, like customer service, PR, stuff like looking after your health and so on when you make games. There are more articles being published about that now. I guess the only thing to do there is to encourage more developers to take part in sort of developer community, maybe people who traditionally wouldn't have done that, to be open to people and kind of share information, I guess.
Sure, yeah, he should read a lot of Paul Taylor's output, because you've written over the years a lot of articles that really specifically pertain to the stuff that isn't pure game development, and some of your indie articles and some of the stuff you're writing now. So that would be a good place to start.
I definitely think people need to advocate stuff. For example, I mean, there was a couple of cases a while back of people's game code getting stolen and they weren't using, a file repository and stuff. And I can imagine, if you've not had like a proper programming education, I can imagine sort of not really understanding how to use a file repository, although that's fairly basic. So I feel like the technology advocate people need to be very strong on telling, writing stuff that they think might be too basic, and giving that, especially to young developers, and saying like, hey, you need to use source control, you need to back stuff up, you need to do this and that. I think that kind of thing is the responsibility of older people if you're participating in a community, I guess.
Oh, there we go.
There we go. So Alex Connolly asks, what obscure or forgotten game would you personally suggest others play to expand or bolster their gaming literacy? I had a bit of a think about this. Obvious one I'm going to say is Wing Commander Privateer, because I talk about that a lot and it's not talked about enough. And probably Covert Action by Sid Meier, which is still a game that is really obscure, and I think a lot of people could learn from its really interesting approach to mini-games. It makes mini-games good, which is very rare. Have you got any for this?
Those are good ones. I don't know if I can think of any off the top of my head that aren't the kind of stuff that I trot out all the time. Right. I think you should play Alpha Centauri if you haven't.
Yeah.
And some Dreamcast stuff, I suppose. But I'm failing on this one, I'm afraid.
Toby Pinder asks, what are the trends in music as they apply to soundtrack scoring in the industry? I mean, you can hear them, right? Like in movies, we're still in the big boomy frame drum, tom, explodey stuff. I guess that there have been people trying to do slightly more interesting things with scores in movies, but a lot of it still is very much around the sort of, it's either that bombastic Hans Zimmer thing or it's something that's very much opposed to that. In terms of like, and that all filters down to games. So I guess you've got some different camps. You've got the kind of Austin Wintory camp of like nice, intricate, usually orchestral sort of pared down chamber music-y stuff. You've got the kind of chiptune disaster piecey stuff, the Hans Zimmer-y stuff. And then you've got people who are doing kind of weirder things that are a bit outside that. So there are definitely a few camps. I think games are still too conservative with what they do with soundtracks. If you're going to do something aleatoric and sort of atonal, then I really like Jason Graves, who did all the Dead Space games. He's kind of one of the best people at doing that sort of music. I want to see stuff that's out of trend. I haven't seen something like, what Gone Home did was really interesting with those kind of Riot Girl, like female punk bands and stuff like that. I'd like to see like a weird genre of music, or maybe a band called in to do a soundtrack. So those are some trends. There we go.
Very nice.
That's the end of that, and we're going to quickly go into the... we'll have a little bit of Cheshire first, because Cheshire managed to get his email in just at the last minute, so I'm going to take a few things that he said. On Mario Maker, he says, it's a tool, full stop. And that's like, that really sums up everything we were saying about it. It's just a tool. Like, people should deal with it as a tool, and they shouldn't expect it to be a game. And as it's a tool, they should expect a lot of the stuff that people make with it to be bad. So that's fine. I completely agree with that.
Okay, I'm on board with that. It's a tool.
It's a tool. He says, I'm still having trouble adjusting to the games as art discussion in general. He doesn't participate in art and critique in other mediums, so having games pushed in that direction feels weird. He's not going to claim that games are or aren't art. He says he's not certain he'll ever be able to embrace the art style critique of games. And that's kind of one of the things, again, that I'm trying to look into is, I think that criticism does some good stuff, but a lot of it is very obscure and self-referential, and pretentious is a difficult word, and it's been argued about by a lot of critics whether that should be viably applied to things, but I think people find it that way. I like criticism that can bridge that gap and that people find interesting. If they don't want to read like wanky art critique, they can still find it interesting, so I think there's a space there, and I think there's a space to be games to be art, and for that art to inform new types of criticism.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I also don't take part in art criticism in any other medium, which makes it harder for me to get involved with it for this medium.
Well, I mean, you read articles about sports and movies that are effectively criticism.
I read some movie reviews. Is sport articles, would they be like art criticism?
Yeah, I think sort of stuff that's commentating on more sort of generalizable things about a specific activity would usually be classed as criticism. I mean, something that needs clearing up here is really the distinction between journalism and criticism, and again, that's kind of a whole conversation there, but definitely take those points. Yeah, he's kind of with us on the overwhelming open world thing where you get spammed with a load of stuff at the start, so good on you there. Right, I think we'll have to move on, but thanks once again, Dave, for sending us your thoughts. If anyone else wants to do that and wants to write a big response to an episode, we will happily include it in this section and follow up with you on some points, so please do feel free that you can do that. Before we go, I want to quickly move into the television and film lounge area and talk about this movie The Box, which I watched, which kind of, you probably saw the trailers for it when it came out. It's Cameron Diaz and James Marsden, and it's based on a Twilight Zone episode. And the premise is this guy turns up with this scary box, and he says, if you press this button that's on the box, then you'll get $1 million, but someone you don't know will die. And so from that premise, which I think is good, it basically does everything with that premise that would be massively uninteresting. It's like a really textbook. And James Marsden, like his face, he just looks like a bewildered squirrel to me. And he's faced with this big sort of supernatural moral decision. The film is so stupid. He works at NASA. He's a scientist working on something to do with Mars. And then there's like supernatural aliens and mind control and teleportation and and then this horrible end, which is just really graphic, and the rest of the film is like kind of quite light-hearted, and it makes absolutely no sense. I think film went into this really weird period of experimenting with horror and just like trying to do the sort of eerie Twilight Zone thing and just got it so wrong. But if you want to see a complete
all of that kind of makes me want to see it.
I think you really like this. Yeah,
I watched R.I.P.D. last
yes.
night, which is legendarily terrible and is indeed quite terrible. It's basically the pitch is Men in Black with zombies.
Yes.
And what's depressing is that it's not actually a million miles away from being good. I think either the writing or the direction, if they had really hit on the comedic notes rather than massively falling flat, it would have been quite fun. It was really close to being good, but it was absolutely terrible.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by that actually. I that is on my list as something to watch. The trailers for that were amazingly bad. So yes, if you want a bad films week, we recommend The Box and R.I.P.D. Right, that's enough for this week's show. If you have any questions, do send them to us. I'm Mode7Games on Twitter, and he's Ian Hardingham, and we'll see you next time.
Goodbye.
That's it, children. Time for bed. Don't forget to pay us a visit at www.visitingthevillage.com.